and welcome back to the Adventures in Advising podcast. This is Matt Markin, and with me, as always, is Ryan Shekel. Ryan, what's up?
Hey, Matt, how's it going?
It is going. Are you ready for today's interview?
Yeah, it's such a nice change of pace from our orientation schedule to stop and talk with colleagues from all over, and I'm looking forward to talking with our guest today.
Yeah. And we are recording this in the beginning of June for anyone that is listening to this. So yeah, it's orientation season, I think, for a lot of us. So good luck to everybody. And let's welcome our guest on today's episode. We get to interview Dr. Sarah Bosch, the Chief Operating Officer at UKAT, the United Kingdom Advising and Tutoring Association. Before joining the UKAT staff team in March of 2025, Sarah held several voluntary roles in UKAT, including being a member of the Board of Trustees. Sarah has worked as a graduate teaching assistant while studying for her PhD, biomechanical investigations of bend running technique in athletic sprint events at the University of Bath, graduating in 2012. While staying at the university, Sarah worked for a year as a teaching fellow before taking up a post at Sheffield Hallam University as a lecturer, then later as a senior lecturer teaching biomechanics with the Academy of Sport. Working across various sport and exercise science and sport and exercise technology degree programs, she assumed several roles, including module and course leadership. From 2021 to 2025, Sarah worked within one of Sheffield Hallam University's central directorates, student experience, teaching, and learning. There, she worked closely with the head of academic advising to support the enhancement of academic advising practice across the institution. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you very much. Hi, both.
Yeah, so great for you to be here with us today. And we're going to throw the first question to you. You know, we've heard from your bio, more of a formal bio, but we're hoping that you can share with us in your own words, kind of telling us about your journey and path. What's been your origin story in higher education?
Yeah, so I did my undergraduate degree in sport and exercise science, and then went on to have a role in a biomechanics lab as a technical engineer. So I got interested in the research side of biomechanics, and then sort of took that plunge to do my PhD in sprinting. So I'd been a sprinter myself, and kind of the perfect PhD came up for me at Bath. So went off to do my PhD. And as part of that, it was a graduate teaching assistant position. So I had to spend 25% of my time teaching and 75% of my time researching my PhD. So I thought I'd gone into it to do the research side, but actually, because I had to do the teaching side, I kind of learned what the teaching was all about and became really interested in that. So having thought I was going to kind of pursue a research career, actually, I've gone in quite a different direction and gone more to the sort of student experience side of it, starting off by kind of helping out with personal tutoring sessions for my PhD supervisor. I kind of realised that as a GTA, I was in kind of a unique position, like a bridge between being, a student and not quite a proper member of staff. So I was quite able to connect with students and understand some of the issues they were facing, even though I was at a different stage of my kind of academic career. So I had the opportunity to kind of stay at Bath and carry on with that for a while, and then realised actually, no, I did really love the teaching side of it, and pursued a teaching career, lecturing career at Hallam. I did the kind of usual rite of passage where you kind of, take leadership roles within the department. And I think for me, quite a big change in my career focus. There were a few things that happened all at the same time. So I undertook a leadership training course. So it's for leaders or future leaders in academia, female leaders. And they basically made you get a mentor. And that mentor was really, really kind of formative for me and made me think a lot about what was it that made me happy at work? What did I want to do? Why was I getting up in the mornings? And at the same time, COVID struck. So we shifted to online. I was course leading at the time. And I found that the thing that was getting me out of bed every day and making me work long hours, like I'm sure everybody else listening to this podcast did, was the student experience. And at that point, it wasn't that I didn't care about my biomechanics research anymore, but it was more that the thing that really motivated me was the student experience, making sure the students were supported, getting them through. So talking to my mentor about some of those experiences was really useful, because she was really kind of helping me to understand where my values were, how I could align my future career with that. And we really talked about, what were the sorts of things I enjoyed doing, what was the position I would want to do. And one of the things that I'd become really interested in was academic advising. I used it really kind of fundamentally as a way of supporting the students in my course. So when an opportunity came up to work in the central department in SETL, Student Experience Teaching and Learning, to work on academic advising full time, I kind of jumped at it with a bit of help from my mentor, convincing me that was, a useful career change, because it was quite different to go out of, discipline related work and teaching into a central role where there was less teaching, and it was a different area. So that's how I got involved with academic advising. As part of that, I learned about UKAT, and that's where I started kind of volunteering and finding other people who were similarly motivated.
So sometimes this comes as a surprise to folks, but one of the sports events I participated in high school was track and field. And I'm kind of curious, what were your events?
I was a sprinter. I was a sprinter. I was a pretty decent 200 meter runner. And I was a fairly decent 300 meter runner. When I was sort of fit and uninjured, I was under 17s. And in those days, I don't know if it's changed actually, but at school, you couldn't run 400 meters if you were a girl because you weren't strong enough. So we had to run the 300 meters instead. But then I started to move up to 400 meters and just started getting injured and kind of coming out of the sport. But sprinting 200 meters and 300 meters mainly, but I'd try my hat at 100 meters too.
Yeah, we my first year in high school, grade 9, my very first meet, I missed my preliminary heat in the 200. So I got to run the 2 mile at lunch. Everybody on the bus was letting me hear it. But so many days are spent around the track and in that community. I know how influential it can be. You've been in your professional life, both in academic and central support roles, as we've heard. What have you learned about institutional change and collaboration from those sort of different experiences? Yeah,
I think for me, moving centrally was really important in understanding how the university worked. I think, again, this is my experience, when I was in department, there are so many things to do and so many kind of individual things to focus on. It can be really easy just to stay in your own little bubble, and you kind of really aware of what's going on immediately around you and perhaps not as aware of what was happening wider. So I started to understand who these people were that we were getting emails from, who the people were that were sort of telling us the things that we needed to do and implement. And for me, the really important bit was understanding why we were being asked to do that. In department, I was able to understand how the decisions were being made and why they were being made. So from a change point of view, I think I was quite lucky, because when I was working centrally, I was still quite fresh out of department. So I understood, how this might land. I understood some of the barriers that perhaps you didn't see. And equally, I could kind of bridge that. I think I've learned a lot from being in those bridging positions where you understand both sides of it, and actually really putting yourself in both camps can really, really help you kind of get credibility and gain momentum with change. So I think for me, it was a really useful process, and also seeing how things are done differently across the institution. So lots of different areas doing really, really good things and being able to kind of facilitate sharing of that information. Think people doing things differently for really good reason. So it was, for me, really useful.
Yeah, and you were talking about bridging, and I would assume also that bridge also continues with your role in UKAT and making that change. For those that don't know, I mean, we've had various guests on, David Gray and Ann Bingham on prior podcast episodes. But for those that maybe this is their first time listening, can you tell us more about what UKAT is and kind of maybe what your specific responsibilities are?
So UKAT is the UK Advising and Tutoring Association. We are a charity. We are concerned with enhancing and promoting personal tutoring in UK higher education, although we actually kind of work globally as well and with people from across the world. So in terms of my position, I'm the Chief Operating Officer. We're a small staff team, so that, is a strategic role, although, you will see me folding leaflets for the conference and I have no, that's a good thing, actually being involved in all parts of the working team. So some of the things that I'm focusing on personally are our institutional accreditation scheme, the workshop package. So I started actually at UKAT working in the Professional Development Committee. The Professional Development Committee, looking at kind of our learning and training offer for UKAT members. And so I'm sort of continuing to do that in my COO role, and helping to broaden out our suite of resources and including many workshop packages, so that our members can benefit from the sort of tailored and bespoke workshops that we can do for our member institutions. And I'm also looking at how our professional recognition scheme can be expanded to reward and recognise contribution from other people who do personal and tutoring roles. So things like, in secondary education, actually, we have a lot of staff who are doing personal tutoring, and perhaps, that transition between secondary education and higher education and understanding how students are kind of following through. So recognising and rewarding some of the work they're doing. So that's some of the main kind of more strategic projects I'm involved in. But it's quite a dynamic team, and it changes from day to day what I'm doing.
So I know there's a lot of folks who would have a way to answer this question. And different roles and responsibilities in professional associations. But from your point of view, and the roles that you've been in and the role you're in now, what do you think the role and responsibility of professional or associations like UKAT, what do you think that is in shaping larger conversations about student and institutional success and how we achieve those things?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
They say teaching is the mother of all professions, but right now it feels like it's happening inside a pressure cooker. That's why we created Higher Listenings, bringing a dose of joy to the future of learning. We're exploring things like why reading may not be obsolete after all, the remarkable connection between emotion and learning, and the real reason students cheat.
It's not a moral failing. It's the circumstances that they find themselves in.
Join us on Higher Listenings, because those who can make a difference teach.
Yeah, I think there's a few things that the associations like UKAT can do. One of them is creating a community, which is, I think, really, really important. For a lot of people, particularly in the UK context, academic advising or personal tutoring is a small part of a much wider role. So a lot of the time it's people in departments, academic staff doing this as a small part. We do have some kind of professional services model where an academic advisor might be their full-time role, but that's probably less common. And I think what associations like UKAT can do is give people a place where they can talk about those things that they really care about, that are maybe not the biggest part of their role, and find like-minded people who can kind of share issues with, who can share good practice with. And by bringing together all of those people, I think we are a very credible organisation that can bring together best practice, that can shape and influence practice across the sector, and perhaps inform policy, but also work with other associations to benefit students. We really do exist to benefit students. That is our raison d'etre. And, by bringing people from across different institutions who have the same goal, even if it is just a small part of their role, we're able to kind of help facilitate that, especially when they maybe aren't able to work full time in it, like I'm fortunate enough to.
Love it. And so I guess kind of going along with that, how would you say, in your opinion, how would you say UKAT is supporting maybe the professional development for those working in academic advising and tutoring?
Yeah, so this is something I'm really interested in. I think a lot of people understand the importance of personal tutoring, but we can only do that if we feel competent and we've got the confidence to do that. And I think the professional development opportunities are really important in that. So we at UKAT, we have a range of activities that people can get involved in. So we have things like webinars, we have our annual conference, we have resources that people can engage with. So they're all, CPD opportunities for people. But we also have our professional development curriculum, which is kind of a range of different activities. We've got some online modules, some short courses, workshops that people can engage with. Some of them are asynchronous. So, literally a 20-minute, if you've got 20 minutes in your lunch break and want to do a little bit of learning on, boundary setting or relationship building, those sorts of things. You can go on and kind of work through things in your own pace. Although there's more formal and structured activities like the workshops that might be a half day or a day for people to engage with. And I think that's really important to give people the confidence. And quite often people are very good at these things, but they need that little bit of confidence, a little bit of structure to understand, that they're doing the right things, opportunity to talk with others about ways they can do it. So we've got lots and lots of different activities like that people can draw from.
So I was thinking about your co-authored piece in the new journal that UKAT launched recently, and I know that there are folks who could talk about Waypoint and that sort of stuff. But I'm curious, both from your role in UKAT, but as a scholar practitioner, writing and publishing in the field. Can you tell us a little bit about your work with Melissa and that piece and what it's like launching something like that?
Yeah. When I went into the role in the Central Directorate in Hallam, my sort of big project when I started in that role was to look at postgraduate academic advising. So Sheffield Hallam is a big university, and we have a lot of undergraduate students, but we have quite a big proportion of postgraduate students. And I think Hallam isn't alone, and quite often there's an assumption that what works for undergraduates works for postgraduate students. And we just wanted to see what was happening across the institution, and look at how we could make sure that we were consistently working to the framework that we had in place, and evaluating how different ways that we did things, how they were working. So in terms of that research, it was quite a good opportunity for me to use some of my research skills, from my PhD and being an active researcher, but in a way that kind of aligned with my values around student experience and the best way we could do academic advising. So we kind of built it to be quite a robust process from the beginning, and thinking about, if we made these changes to how academic advising was done, how would we evaluate how they'd worked? So it was really a 3-year project to, talk to staff about what was happening in department, what was the kind of status quo, was everybody doing the same thing, was everybody doing anything, what was working well and what wasn't working well. I was really clear that there was no way I was going in as the expert. I wasn't in there to help people exactly how to do postgraduate academic advising, because there was lots of really good practice, but also lots of kind of problems and barriers and perhaps differing expectations of postgraduate students. So there was quite a big working party who kind of audited what we were doing. And then it would be fair to say, shamelessly scoured good practice across the UKAT community and wider, and the literature, and looked at what were the kind of ways we could implement consistent use of the framework, but give enough autonomy to courses and enough variability to meet differing needs of different areas of the university. So we had 3 models. One was where kind of academic advising was something that happened outside of the curriculum. They had named academic advisor. They met them a certain number of times of year, and saw how students' perceptions of that relationship and their satisfaction with that, how that went. We looked at what happened if you embedded it. So you ensured that students were being taught by their academic advisor in perhaps a professional module or similar, and then also had their academic advising meetings. And then we also looked at an extended induction type model, so an extended advising where they're going to structured sessions, group sessions, but over kind of 6 or 12 weeks, regular sessions. We also had a model which was kind of student driven. So we looked at whether if you just let the students come to you, you let them know you're there, you remind them you're there and what you can help with, but let them come to you, whether that would work. But that was for a very small number of courses, because it wasn't really in the spirit of how we wanted to proactively do academic advising. But we had some small courses that were those particular students were probably from clinical backgrounds, were already had a full-time job, and were maybe using the university in a slightly different way. So in terms of that research, we looked at which of those models came up as being given the best perceptions. We looked at which ones had better retention rates and how many withdrawals there were, and found that the embedded had much better and more positive results. The students really understood better what the academic advisor was for. They took up the opportunities to meet with their academic advisor. They reported better relationships with their advisor. And knew better what to go to their advisor for. So that kind of relationship building, I think, and that exposure to their academic advisor more, really seemed to have a beneficial effect. And that was great. And we knew what we wanted to do, and we were able to then kind of advocate for that where possible across the institution. But also, I think because of our commitment to UKAT and the wider sort of sector, we wanted to make sure that we could share that. So when Waypoint launched, we were really keen to get that out. And I totally appreciate that what works for one institution might not work for another, but it was good to have some empirical evidence of the things I think we probably already knew, but actually have some kind of numbers and evidence to support that, and some really good qualitative data from students as well about how they found the different models.
So I'm curious, prior to the launch of Waypoint, had you and Melissa discussed, like, where does this go if we want to share it larger? Just from the perspective of someone who might be interested in doing something similar at their institution, the conversation often is, okay, we could tell people here, maybe we present at a conference. I'm curious how you saw your options prior to, since you began this effort before Waypoint started. What was it like being there, thinking, where do we go with this once we have our results? Yeah,
I think the intention was always that we should be able to externally publish. That was the intention from the beginning. So we went into it with very much a kind of a research evaluation hat on, so what do we want to change? How will we know that that's a real change? How will we measure that? And we kind of pretty much every bit of work that we ever did in that department was grounded in kind of evaluation from the beginning. So building in evaluation at the start. So we had that ethos and we had that kind of culture. So we knew we needed to be robust, and we needed to have thought about what our theory of change was, really, from if we do this, what the outcomes might be. So we went through the sort of ethics procedures. We made sure that everything was ethical, that we had approval, that we could publish. Had we identified our target journal? Probably not. No, I'm not sure that's necessarily the correct answer, but that is the truth of it. We knew we wanted to. We hadn't identified our target journal. We have got other journals that we thought about, publishing in, sort of pedagogy, learning and teaching journals. But as soon as we heard that Waypoint was being launched, we were like, that's the one for us, because we had always targeted UKAT conference as somewhere we could share what we were doing, because we knew that it was a really, really good conference for sharing practice. And we also knew that there would be some really good critical friends, to kind of check and challenge. And I think that's really important. So, even before we'd got any results, we'd taken it and said, this is what we're doing. This is our idea. So actually that kind of community to think about, this is how I'm changing practice, this is what I think I need to measure, and this is my results, was actually really useful. So we did present at the conference for a couple of years before actually publishing in the journal.
I think the overarching goal, and you've mentioned it, the word share and sharing it. So you getting the information out there. What did you do? What did you learn? What can others maybe gain from it? I think other things to also share is that, with your involvement in UKAT, not only your staff role, but your voluntary roles you had prior to that, you've been very involved within UKAT. to where you also in 2023 got the Outstanding Contribution to UKAT Award. But also you were a previous keynote speaker at one of the UKAT conferences. And I was hoping you can share a little bit about that experience about being a keynote speaker at a UKAT conference, and also what your keynote speech was about.
Yeah. So, it was a really, looking back now, it was a really positive experience. I was very nervous, as you can imagine. I was really honored to have been asked to be the keynote. It's really interesting because I think that there's always a tendency to feel like, well, what can I say that people don't know? I mean, UKAT is full of amazing people. Genuinely, you're people who are doing really good stuff. And my first feeling was, well, what can I tell them that they don't already know? What can they learn from me? And you think there are so many people doing great things. So when I was thinking about what I was doing, the theme of the conference was sort of shining a spotlight on the students and personal tutoring. So I was thinking about something that had resonated with me from my experiences of being a personal tutor, and also from some of the research that we'd done with minoritized students. And so my keynote was about thinking, who are we looking at when we're shining that spotlight, and how do we really know our students? So I kind of focused on the things that we might know from an institutional level, so demographics of students and some of the assumptions we might make. So it's a bit of a kind of exercise that perhaps anyone can do. I asked everybody to sort of close their eyes and think about their typical student, and I did it myself. And when I think of my typical student, I sort of go back to my undergraduate days, and I see the sport and exercise science, rugby playing guys walking down the corridor en masse, having a great time, as committed to their studies as they were to rugby. Maybe not, I don't know. But, that kind of perception of your typical 18 to 21-year-old male doing sport and exercise science. And I think everybody kind of can visualize a student. But then when you unpack that, what do you really know about your students? And often what we see isn't what they're really experiencing. So we kind of went through some examples of things that students might be not telling you, or some of the assumptions we might make as lecturers based on our own experiences. And the example I gave was of a disabled student, and talking about some of her issues that she might be facing. And actually, for this student in this example, and it's a real person, a real student who didn't mind me sharing their story, they were a Paralympic athlete. So actually, there was nothing to do with their disability that was causing them a problem. They didn't really need a learning contract. They didn't really need, assistive technology. But what they were doing was losing big chunks of learning because they were competing at the highest level. And the isolation, the time management, the lost learning involved with that, that's where a personal tutor could really help. But, I sort of posed questions about what are the assumptions we make, and what are the assumptions that we kind of bring from our own life, and how can we put them beside? Because I think we do all have assumptions. We do all have our prior experiences. But the most important thing is to talk to those students about what they need and not assume what they need. And I think that's where I've grown as a personal tutor, is having those conversations and trying to understand what they want and talk to them and let them tell us what they need, rather than saying, oh, I've got this workshop you could go to because this will be great for you. So that, it was a good experience for me. For me personally, I actually really enjoyed it, because I think when you get a room full of people who care about students, you get an audience of people who really care about listening to people talking about how we can care about students. So that was a great keynote for me to do, because people were really receptive to it.
Well, speaking of assumptions and the things that might surprise us, or the little gaps in the way we see things, you've seen this association from so many perspectives, as a volunteer, as a delegate, as a keynote speaker, and now in a staff role with the organization. Has there been anything as chief operating officer that surprised you, that was a new perspective, or a new thing that you were like, I had no idea that this was what was going on? It's such a rare opportunity to to talk with someone who's in this kind of role, I'm sure there were things that you learned along the way.
Yeah, I think I'm still very much learning. I still feel like it's very early days in my role, and there's still loads to learn. I think one of the things that I probably expected to learn, but definitely have learned, is, the variety of ways that people do things. So again, this is me needing to learn not to bring my own assumptions in, that the way I've done it in my previous institutions may not be how things are done in the other institutions we're working with. So the variety of ways that people do things is quite interesting. The level of detail, I think that whenever you change institutions, and I've been at Hallam for quite a long time, just doing things, different ways of working, those are some of the surprises that, you kind of have to get around. Working from home, working remotely full time, and not having a physical office to go into. Those are, they're all differences. In terms of the conference, the sheer amount of work that goes into organising a conference, it's that kind of the swan gliding across the lake, but their feet are pedalling 10 to the dozen. It's that kind of thing. The whole team worked so hard to pull off a conference, and it is an absolute labour of love. But I actually really enjoyed that part of it. I really loved meeting all the delegates, getting to chat to everybody as they came to the registration desk. That was really nice for me. And I think, it gave me a really different experience of the conference, actually. I didn't get to see as much of it as I would have liked to have done because I was too busy kind of behind the scenes. But it was really nice and really rewarding. And seeing other people kind of getting lots from it and sharing practice was great.
The amount of work, the amount of months, even years planning a conference, and then it's done in like 2 days. So it's like kudos to you and your team with everyone part of UKAT that put on the conference. Having now this being the 10th conference, 10th anniversary, what does that mean to you?
I think it's really special. I think it really truly shows that it's a credible organisation, that it is kind of robust in what it does, that it's adding value to the sector. I don't think you would have got to 10 years if people didn't find it useful. I don't think we'd have got to the position that we're growing the staff team and able to provide more services to our members if it wasn't useful and if it wasn't valuable and credible. So I think that's really nice. I sometimes feel like I have been involved with UKAT for probably about 5 years, but to be on the staff team now, I feel like a bit of an imposter to come in and take any of that credit, because actually, I've come in at a really good time where we're doing some awesome stuff. But, there's a lot of people who were before me making that happen. But I'm really proud of what we do. I think our kind of the way we approach things, the compassion and kindness that we have for our members is really impressive. It is a very nice community that genuinely is looking to help everybody. And I think sometimes, going to a conference can be a bit scary. Presenting at a conference can be a bit scary. And there can be a feeling that, you've got to defend yourself all the time. But actually, it's about UKAT is certainly about bringing people with you and helping people to share their expertise, because there is so much expertise in the sector. It's incredible.
It really is about that balance of challenge and support. We often talk about that with our students, but I can tell you, very rarely are people going to accept a challenge if they haven't felt that you've supported them before. So that's definitely been the experience that I've had in my interaction with UKAT. Its members, its staff, its events, and so on, especially given where I come from. I'm kind of curious, though, thinking big picture, where do you see the future of academic advising and personal tutoring heading in the UK over the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, I think it's always, crystal ball gazing is always a tricky one, isn't it? I think I would like to think, and I think this is probably true, that more institutions will really value the role of the personal tutor and the academic advisor in terms of supporting our students. I think that the way that we can support students as personal tutors or academic advisors to feel that they belong, to achieve their success, to know that they matter to an institution, that is only going to be a good thing. in the UK, it's no secret that there is sort of financial difficulty on the sector, and we need to make sure that, you know, we are supporting students to stay in courses, you know, and retaining our students. But really, there's that moral imperative to do that as well, that students feel supported, especially as, you know, for widening participation, bringing in students from diverse backgrounds, making sure that they have opportunities to succeed is really important. So I think that more institutions will put more, you know, onus on doing that. And that means that we need to support those staff doing it, because, you know, their workloads aren't getting any easier. You know, they need to feel empowered to support their students. They need to feel confident in what they're doing. I think there are ways of perhaps working efficiently and looking at the ways we're working, you know, using technology to help us, but notwithstanding the fact that it is a relational process. You know, we do need to know our students. We need to be able to have human conversations with them. But there are ways that we can kind of streamline information that we send to students, that we can think about how we're communicating with them and freeing up time to have those sort of proper conversations. But also looking at things like, you know, what are the easy wins for getting to know my students? You know, so where can I pair up an academic advisor with somebody who's already teaching them is a way of kind of building those relationships for no extra resource, if you like. So I think there's kind of going to be a focus on, you know, how we can do things efficiently, but making sure that we're supporting that wide range of students.
Well, we'll check back with you in 5 to 10 years and see if all that came true. Is there anything like, what's one thing you might wish people understood more about personal tutoring?
Oh, do I have to have one? So I think,
or as many as you want.
Yeah, no, I think you get what you put in to personal tutoring. I think that it is not without effort, and I think institutions and individuals need to understand that there is an effort and that there is a commitment involved in forming genuine relationships with students that allow them to be able to get the most out of it. So, you know, as an individual, if I just send an email, that is not going to get, you know, a student to want to come and see me. So me putting in that effort to get to know them and to kind of give myself a little bit to them, let them know a little bit about me, you know, within the realms of professional boundaries, but, you know, forming genuine relationships and being curious about our students. The more we put into it, the more we get out of it. And for me, that is kind of one of the most rewarding things. You know, I've had a LinkedIn message today from one of my former academic advisees letting me know how they did in their dissertation. Now, that was because we'd formed a relationship. I genuinely wanted to know how they'd done. They genuinely wanted me to know how they'd done. And that is so rewarding for me. But that's because of the investment in time for both of us. And that includes the student.
So I will say, like, me personally, you know, we met at the UKAT conference, this past one in London. And at the social, the night before the conference is when we got to chat. And it was like an instant connection, getting to talk to you and learn about you. We got to talk about Harry Potter and how my partner was a huge Harry Potter fan. And you gave me great advice of what my partner could do when we got to the Harry Potter Warner Brothers studio and talking to the staff there. And so great tips that you gave, but it felt like we were instant friends, and I really appreciated that. So I guess the last question that we want to ask to wrap up is, Sarah, outside of UKAT, outside of work, what do you do for your wellness?
Well, other than a lot of Harry Potter watching and booking a trip to the new Universal Epic theme park to see more Harry Potter. So my family, my friends and my dogs are really important to me, but this might come as a bit of a surprise to anybody who knew me as a track and field athlete when I refused to go more than once around the track. I do distance running now for my well-being. So I'm a fairly keen runner. It's something that I took up during my PhD. I needed something that I could take seriously enough to get me out of the office, but was unrelated enough to my PhD to feel like a well-being activity. So I got convinced to go for a run by my friend who was a very keen ultramarathoner. And she slowly but surely encouraged me to start running. So that's the thing I do for kind of my own well-being, is run sort of 4 or 5 times a week, sort of 10Ks, half marathons, and I have done the occasional marathon, but so that's one of my things. But watching and supporting my husband, who's an elite wheelchair racer, and kind of traveling, some of my big things.
Well, Sarah, this was a great conversation, great interview. Learned a lot. Thank you so much for joining Ryan and I on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
Sarah.